Good morning, biology students. So today we are going to finish up your notes so that you are ready for your test on Thursday this week. So just a couple notes. We are just going to take them right on this paper here, and then I am going to switch to my screen behind me and take some notes there as well. So we're going to start with learning target 7, fermentation. I know you have all heard the term of fermentation. You know what fermentation is. It's the act of something going bad, things fermenting over time. So fermentation is technically the metabolism of glucose without oxygen. Oops. And this without oxygen part is very important, okay? So pay close attention to the part without oxygen. Okay? It's what's called anaerobic respiration. I'm really struggling with spelling. Because anaerobic respiration means without oxygen. You can think of our cellular respiration unit, our notes that we went over last week, and cellular respiration requires oxygen, so it was aerobic, whereas fermentation is anaerobic, it doesn't require oxygen. And there's two different types of fermentation. Okay, our first type of fermentation is what's called lactic acid fermentation. And most of you have probably heard of lactic acid. Lactic acid is in our human bodies. It's when your muscles start to hurt after a workout. It's because of lactic acid buildup. So this happens in mammalian muscle, or mammal muscles. Again, I'm really struggling with the spelling. And what's happening in lactic acid fermentation? We're taking glucose and turning it into what we call pyruvate. And then from pyruvate, we turn that pyruvate into lactate. Sorry, Miss Westmoreland walked in really quick. So again, we're turning that glucose into pyruvate, and then we're turning that pyruvate into lactate. Okay, so it's a breakdown of glucose without using oxygen, and we're breaking it down by turning it into pyruvate and then into lactate. Okay. Other organisms are also able to use fermentation, but they do it a little bit differently. So there's another type of fermentation that's called alcoholic fermentation. And this is done by bacteria or yeast. Okay. And they again are starting with glucose, and they convert that glucose to pyruvate, but instead of turning it into lactate, they're turning it into ethanol. Okay, they're converting that glucose into ethanol eventually. And what is ethanol? Ethanol is a type of alcohol, correct. We as humans can't do that because we would turning all our sugars into alcohol, and we'd basically be getting drunk by breaking down our sugars, which is very bad. There is actually a syndrome that does do this in some human bodies. It's very rare. It's called autobrewery syndrome, because your body is acting as a brewery and turning all of the sugars you eat into alcohol and getting you drunk when you're not even drinking. It's very unsafe. It's very bad for your liver. It's very bad for your body in general. So that is fermentation. That is what you need to know about what happens when oxygen isn't present in the body. For our next little section of notes, we're going to be talking about the flow of biological energy, and I'm going to take these notes directly on the board. So you should all have this image in your note packet, and we're just going to show how energy moves throughout the world. Okay, so we're going to start here with light. This is light. Okay. And we know that light comes in to what? This is our chloroplast. Our chloroplast is the thing in plants that's collecting the light. Okay, so we know that sunlight energy is captured and stored as glucose. So sunlight energy is captured and stored as glucose. Inside the chloroplast, and it gives off O2. Okay, so we know that during the process of photosynthesis, O2 is given off. Okay, so we are here we're making glucose and O2, which these are the products of photosynthesis. Okay, these are our products of photosynthesis. We know that those are given off from our chloroplast. Okay, and glucose, we know that glucose is powering the production of ATP. Okay, we know that glucose is powering production of ATP. And it's creating CO2 for plants. Sorry, I'm blocking all of that. Okay, so we know that our glucose and oxygen are going into our mitochondria. And we know that through cellular respiration, our mitochondria is creating ATP for our body, which is adenosine triphosphate. It's making ATP, and it's also making CO2, which is then used in the chloroplast when it takes in light to make glucose, which goes to the mitochondria to make ATP, gives off CO2, and again the cycle happens again and again and again. Okay, so this is how cellular respiration and photosynthesis play a role with one another. Alrighty, lastly, I do want to just mention enzymes. We have talked about enzymes already in class. We talked about how enzymes are an example of a protein. And so we also talked about what enzymes are. But enzymes are specifically proteins that act as biological catalysts. Proteins that act as biological catalysts by speeding up a reaction. Proteins that act as a biological catalyst by speeding up a reaction. Okay, so you can see in this graph that it requires this much energy to start a reaction without an enzyme. But with an enzyme, it only requires this much. So you can see that an enzyme is lowering the activation energy needed to start a reaction. And enzymes are very specific. So each enzyme controls a very specific reaction. Okay, so each enzyme is controlling a very specific reaction. And they're affected by temperature, pH, concentration, and all sorts of things. So enzymes are very particular, and they need to have all of these things in a certain threshold in order to work.